So, welcome back from your holiday break to this week's edition of Military Trailblazer Office Hours. Thanks so much for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here in the spirit of community, mentorship, and learning. I'm your host, Dave Nava. I'm a lead solution engineer at Salesforce and a military trailblazer. Each week, we invite a co-host or co-host to take part in the conversation so we can leverage their experience, expertise, and unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is how to create and market your personal brand. And I'd like to welcome and briefly introduce our co-host for tonight's session, Otis Hooper. Otis is an enterprise account exec for Air Force accounts at Salesforce. He's also a motivational speaker, a professional athlete, and a 21-year veteran of the Air Force with over 3,500 hours of flight time and 8 combat deployments. Fun fact, Otis has competed in American Ninja Warrior as well as the Mr. Olympia Pro Bodybuilding competition, which is pretty cool. It's awesome to have you here, Otis. Welcome.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Do you want to take a moment and further introduce yourself and kind of share your Salesforce story?
Sure. That was a great rundown. Normally, it depends on the audience who I'm talking to, what story they want to hear, but I'll kind of give a brief overview of kind of where I started. So I went to the Air Force Academy from 95 to 99. Out of the Air Force Academy, I got an assignment as a pilot in the Air Force. So I flew tankers, the KC-135, which is the picture right above my shoulder, and then in active duty for about 5-6 years. That's where I deployed about 8 times overseas. And then I switched to the DC Air National Guard, where I was also a pilot. I did VIP airlift, flew congressmen, senators, the first lady all over the world. I did that for about 10 years. And then I started to switch into more leadership roles, where I was helping with domestic operations in the Air National Guard. And then I finished out my last 3 years in the military as a reservist, Air Force reservist, helping FEMA as a liaison with FEMA. So that took me to about 21 years, and it was time to retire right in the middle of COVID. So summer of 2020, I retired after 20 years. And I was trying to think of what could I do a real job in this kind of pandemic environment. Where I could leverage all of that experience, the 21 years of experience, into something else, into the next career, the next chapter. And so kind of my story is a little different. I was just down at the pool with my kids. I got 4 boys, and talking to some of the dads at the pool. And one of the dads was a previous Army soldier, and he was an account executive at another company. And he started to share with me his experience and what an account executive does. And said, "Hoop, dude, you'd be a great fit as an AE and maybe a tech company where we're working remote." And so I had some experience with Salesforce, using Salesforce as a customer when I was doing the motivational speaking. And so I applied, I put my resume together, applied to several different tech companies, and Salesforce showed interest, went through the interview process, and I landed as in the role as an account executive for the Air Force. So I'm on a team of 5 to 6 folks that sell to the Air Force, and my accounts are the Air National Guard, Air Force Reserves, the Air Force Academy, and several other accounts. So that's in a nutshell, and I'll pause there.
That's awesome. Thanks very much for sharing your story, Otis. We'll go ahead and take care of some admin items here real quick before we dive into the open dialogue and discussion. So for those joining for the first time, I always like to briefly explain kind of the purpose of office hours, so you can get a sense for what we're doing here. And these sessions are an informal get-together for gathering with military trailblazers and allies to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding-related topics in order to help you achieve your professional development and your career-related goals. And so for the next hour, this is your opportunity to take part in collaborative mentorship. Everyone on the call is encouraged to step up, and you can help answer questions from your perspective, which of course will provide additional diversity of experience to the answers given. So please do keep an eye on the chat window during tonight's session. I've already started, and I will continue to, as well as others will, share a lot of great information there, including learning, networking, and employment opportunities. If you want to ask a question during any point during tonight's session, please feel free to do so. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking up, you can also post your questions in chat. I'll do my best to monitor the chat window, and I'll also be looking for raised hands. And so I'll go ahead and start us off with a couple questions to prime the pump. So, for folks that may not be familiar with kind of how sales roles work with Salesforce, Otis, could you explain your role as an enterprise account exec for the Air Force and what that entails?
Sure. Like I said, I had no idea what an account executive even was when I first started on this new career path. And basically, what I do is I'm kind of like a quarterback on a team, right? So I have a bunch of folks, bunch of really smart people that help support me and connecting to other accounts and other clients. So my job day to day is to talk to folks in the Air National Guard, the Air Force Reserves, and the Air Force Academy. Those are my accounts, my main accounts, and just find pain points, find obstacles that are slowing them down in their mission. And then based on my experience being in the Air Force, I kind of know where all the bodies are buried and what slows those missions down. And I translate what they see as problems into solutions that I know our team at Salesforce can help solve. So I'll go back to my smart guys on my team, the solution engineers, the architects, the marketing folks, the business development reps, and we'll put together a game plan to help solve one or all of those problems that they presented to me. And then we'll just take them through the journey. Usually it takes 3 to 6 months to kind of help craft and customize a specific solution to that pain point or problem. And then we go from there. And we do that in several different accounts. And like I said, we work with a team. I have a team of 5 or 6 folks that sell to the Air Force, different departments in the Air Force, and we all try to learn from each other's lessons.
Awesome. Thanks very much for breaking that down. And folks, if you do have additional questions for what it's like to be account exec or what some of the other sales roles are at Salesforce, please do feel free to pipe up at any time and ask Otis. For the majority of this session, though, I think what we're going to do is focus on personal branding, but feel free to ask those sales questions if you have them. And so we've got our first question that's come in. Hassan is asking, how much experience did you or do you have with the Salesforce CRM platform, Otis?
So very limited, to be honest with you. So I used, like David mentioned, I was a keynote speaker. So I spoke to Fortune 500 companies for about 2-3 years. And in that company itself, they use Salesforce as a product. And they just nurtured leads. They took the customer through from generating a lead to actually executing a keynote speech. And so I was just a guy on the back end of Salesforce, just plugging in my stats where I'm going to fly to. Very, very simple. So I knew some very limited knowledge of Salesforce before I started the role.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. All right. So if you guys have questions, just feel free to keep pasting them in chat. I'll go ahead and ask a couple that I have. So to kick us off on the branding topic, can you define for us, Otis, what is a personal brand? How would you define that term overall?
Well, I had to really think about it when we're with this topic, and really it's pretty simple. I think it's just an intentional effort to create public awareness about some type of expertise that you have or passion that you have. So just creating intentional effort and telling that story to your particular audience.
Yeah, that's such a key component of communicating your values, being able to tell your story. What are some, because typically when we make that transition, whether it's from the military into Salesforce, or it could be any other career field into Salesforce, you have to translate your experiences into a context that makes sense for that given industry. So how did you go about doing that? What are maybe some tools or resources, or what strategy did you use to translate your military skills into being a pilot to now you're selling a CRM platform for Salesforce?
Right. And that's the $1 million question. So really, and it's really a different kind of path that I took. So we all know all the different platforms that are out there: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. So I started telling a story about my fitness journey. So while I was doing the VIP airlift stuff, I just got so consumed in the mission, I stopped taking care of myself. And kind of like all of us, maybe during your professional career, you kind of get consumed in climbing the corporate ladder or making the next rank or going for the next job. And you stop taking care of yourself. You stop taking care of your health. No more working out, maybe just not eating right. And for me, I had four boys that were growing, and we're sitting around the dinner table and they're getting ready to start playing football and do sports. And I'm talking about the importance of eating right and working out and staying in shape. And my 7-year-old looked across the table from me and was like, "Dad, you don't do any of that stuff. So why should we?" And so that night I realized that the team that I was truly leading, my family, saw something different than what I saw. And I decided that I wanted to make a change. And so I started the next day with a really small goal, was 1 push-up and 1 sit-up. And I started to build on that with consistency. And I brought my team along, my family. I involved them in all those things. And I ended up, like David mentioned, becoming a pro bodybuilder out of that. Did that between 6 months and 12 months. And so I tell that story because that's kind of how I learned how to tell a story on a platform, which happened to be Instagram. And so as I started to tell the story of my fitness journey, I wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, talk about the goals that I was setting, talk about the wins, and especially the losses and the lessons that I learned throughout that. So I kind of practice on a really easy platform. And then some folks took notice of that. David mentioned I was on American Ninja Warrior, and I ended up doing a triathlon. And I learned how to translate the message that I was talking to and the audience that I was talking to on Instagram into more of a business value on LinkedIn or on Facebook or on Twitter. I just adjusted the language, but there was always a lesson learned. And when I would tell that story specifically in key images from the stage, what resonated the most was where I started from and the vulnerability that I shared. And so I focused on that. I started to focus on that and started to focus more on the lesson learned and the value. And so I would tell that story in LinkedIn. And so I did that more often, probably 4 to 5 years. So if you go through my LinkedIn, you'll see just posts about developing trust with my 2-year-old. You'll see posts about me doing a triathlon and where I failed, where I had a panic attack in the first 5 minutes. And so I started to learn, and I really paid attention to whose stories resonated with me when I would look at somebody on social media, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Facebook. So when I would pause and read a message, whatever stirred emotion in me, I kind of paid attention to that. And I saw how the story was crafted. And I saw how it provided value to me at the end on what I could do to maybe achieve some similar things. So David, hopefully that answers your question on how I was able to transition from kind of telling a fun little story about fitness and being overweight to transitioning that into a business value on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it does. And I was taking some notes because that's an incredible story. And there's a lot to unpack there. A couple things that I really wanted to just mention again, because they're phenomenal. Regardless of where we're at in our professional journey and our fitness journey and our personal journey, it's those small actions that you just decide you're going to start taking and then repeat over time that add up to big results. Mm-hmm. And so, folks are like, oh, I don't want to work out because, like it's not going to matter and it takes forever to notice a difference. But like Otis just shared, if you do a push-up and a sit-up a day and you build on that slowly over time, it leads to great things. Similarly, for your professional development, you do a badge a day, do the 100 days of Trailhead, a badge a day. And, in 100 days, you're a ranger, and then you can leverage that for the next thing and the next thing. So you gotta start somewhere. And those micro changes end up to having big impactful results over time that compound on each other. So that's awesome. The other thing I wanted to mention that you said was, when we're all crafting our personal brand, which is really important, and I'm going to ask you why it's important just to underscore the point. And then maybe share kind of why I think it's important too. But when we're all crafting a personal brand, you have to focus on the characteristics that are going to make up your brand. And so you had mentioned a couple times that vulnerability was a key factor in crafting your brand. And you mentioned emotion too, because at the end of the day, right, you can have a personal brand, but if it's not evoking an emotion in your target audience, if it's not something that they can relate to and be motivated by, it's not going to be effective. So that's the end result that you're shooting for, is to create that emotion, to get people involved in your journey and to bring them with you, to want them to come, along on that journey and figure out how it ends up.
Yeah, David, I'll kind of piggyback on that. So I started to, first it was a fitness thing, and then I saw value working with teams. I mean, I'm flying airplanes, right? So I'm not flying an airplane by myself. It's a crew of 6 or 7. So I would start to draw those, hey, I have a mission in this airplane that I'm flying, but I rely on my team, just like maybe a solution engineer may rely on his team, or a program manager may rely on their team to get the mission done, and tell them that story. So I think it's super important. And one of the things that I tried to focus on was it was a quote that I came across, but really the bottom line is success before significance. So before I could even think that I could have any significance in branding, I needed to show success, and show deep mastery in one thing, right? And so the quote was, try to learn everything about something and then learn something about everything. So what that means is really do one thing incredibly well and show that you understand the discipline and the commitment required to achieve the mastery, and then branch out your knowledge base to show you know a little bit about everything, so you can have discussions around that topic. And so that's what I try to do with my personal brand is to show deep mastery in one thing, which at the end of the day, it's just discipline and commitment to achieve a goal.
Yeah, I love that. I wrote it down: success before significance. You definitely have to prove that you've accomplished something before folks are going to pay attention. But in this ecosystem, it's easy to do that, with those micro goals that you set for yourself that build up over time. And if you're sharing those in social media, there's your success that over time builds significance in the eyes of your target audience, which is, the Trailblazer community and those folks who may want to hire you. So that's fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to just circle back and kind of put a bow on it by asking probably a redundant question, but just to put a T on it. Why is developing a personal brand an essential component of professional development? Why do you think it is so important?
Well, really, it kind of just helps to focus your story, and it focus your audience on the fact that you're credible in something. So you can probably talk about a lot of different things in your life, in your experience, in your job, but to bring that focus in on a brand, because that's what branding is about, is intentional and telling an intentional story. So first you have to decide what story, what objective do you want to achieve? Do you just want to inspire the audience? Are you trying to tell a story to get a job? It just depends on what you're trying to achieve and what your main target is. And that for me was eye-opening, is once I learned what my targets were. In Instagram, telling the fitness story, my only target was to inspire other people. When I switched it over to LinkedIn, I wanted to tell value and talk about lessons learned from a normal everyday dad, and how I was able to apply those lessons learned into business, my Air Force job. And then when I started to move into Salesforce, into more of a technical area of expertise, it was the same lessons. It was working together with your team, leveraging strengths, building on weaknesses, and listening to your audience. In my case, it's the different accounts that I have. So really, it just shows, for me, it talks about credibility and building that credibility.
Yeah, for sure, building that credibility. And for everyone on the call, as I look out across the audience, I see a lot of faces that have had recent announcements on social media with achievements. And I don't want to call any specifically and put you on the spot, but if you wanted to share, how your approach to personal branding enabled you to be successful in getting the job at Salesforce, in getting accepted to the Hiring Our Heroes cohort, in getting hired at another partner firm, please feel free, raise your hand and share, because I think as Otis has proven and demonstrated, there's not one personal branding strategy. Otis has a very unique background, American Ninja Warrior and fitness buff, Mr. Olympia and Instagram, which I hadn't even considered to be a social media platform that I have used, but he's using it to be successful and translating that into professional success. So, if you have examples where, maybe your approach is non-standard or a little bit different, love to hear about it. Because that's the whole point, is to get that diversity of experience for branding, right? There's not one way to do it. There's multiple ways. So don't be shy, raise your hand. But until I see those hands, I'll go ahead and keep going. And so, Otis, you mentioned that you initially started your branding with Instagram and just trying to motivate folks, and then later, when you decided that you were going to use that brand to have professional success outside the military, you switched to LinkedIn. Can you talk a little bit about your LinkedIn strategy at the tactical level? So, maybe how many times you were posting, how did you know your posts were successful? What are some practices that you developed as part of your daily campaign to brand yourself?
So I started off afraid of posting, to be honest with you. Like I didn't want to embarrass myself. So I would, what I first started to do was I just observed. So I got on LinkedIn, created an account, and I just observed people and the same thing. What evoked emotion in me? What would make me want to reach out to somebody? What would make me want to write a comment? And so one of my first posts was, it's kind of embarrassing, but it was just kind of, here's how I build a goal. But the more I shared it, the more I practiced it, I realized nobody really cared. Nobody's judging you. Nobody is going to make fun of you. Everybody's just kind of telling their own story in a different way. And so the more I shared in that first post, once I hit it, I probably edited it like 20 times. But I learned how to speak the language. And I learned how to speak the language, and I realized that my story was no different than anybody else's. I was just deciding to share a different version or a different focus with my story. So a couple things that I learned as far as strategies go was don't sell. Number one, don't try to sell anything. Don't try to sell yourself. Don't spam. Whatever it is that you're talking about, make sure you're authentic and live it. And one of the things later on that I learned how to do was to write the post so that it's shareable. So if you're providing a lesson learned, or if you're providing value, write it so that somebody else that's reading it may feel compelled to share it, and it won't sound awkward or weird coming from someone else. So maybe put the bluff up front, the bottom line up front, or here's the lesson that I learned right up front. So as soon as they hit post, there's a lesson learned, and here's a cool little story that's packaged in there. Let's see, I wrote a couple of these things down. So the point of that for me, what I learned, there's power in kind of building off of other people's platforms. So if I have 1,000 followers on LinkedIn, and then Eric shares it, he's got 2,000 followers, and Trish shares it, she's got 500 followers. I've just hit 4,000 different audiences with 4,000 different types. So that's one of the ways that I measured it, is how many people are sharing it. And I think that's one of the most powerful ways to measure is the shareability of your content.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I love the concept of power in building off of others. I've certainly experienced that just with these office hours where other folks on the call have, shared the post and even built upon it to create weekly posts, where they share, their lessons learned, maybe the top quote from the session. And I end up learning something, even though I was there, right? I end up learning something and be able to look at the office hours in a different light, which adds value. So it's fantastic. I always, when I approached branding for the first time, I was scared too. And in reading some of these comments, David mentions that he thought LinkedIn was the Facebook of business. So, there's this misconception about what maybe Facebook is because you're in the military, you don't really use it. Yeah, you may have a profile, right? But you're not actively using it as part of your professional journey. And then, Christopher mentions a person can go through multiple lifetimes and shifts in purpose. And so, it's really, it's about iterating on your brand until you find something that resonates with your audience. And you'll know when it does, because that's when folks will choose to follow you, choose to comment on your post. And so you need to keep updating it and keep working on it until you get there. And obviously the military doesn't teach you how to do this. You have to figure it out on your own. Or if you're lucky, you find a resource in your transition process or afterwards that teaches you how to do it. So if there's anyone out there that has suggestions for organizations or tools that teaches you how to brand, I'd love to hear them. Post them in chat or raise your hand. You can chat about it. I use, and I see David, your hand, I'm going to call on you here in a second. I use Fourblock, Fourblock, which is open to transitioning service members, spouses, and veterans. and they taught me how to brand, and that was a game changer for me. Completely changed my professional journey. But to Otis's point, get over the fear and just post something. It doesn't have to be, the best post ever. It just has to get out there and start that habit pattern, right? Like he was talking about earlier, those micro goals that you set for yourself that you build on over time. So I started with the crawl methodology. What's something we all have in common when we join a new job? We don't know anything. So that's your post right there. Ask questions. Ask a ton of questions. This community is unique in that people love to help each other. And so they're always going to answer questions. And you can piggyback off of that, like Otis was talking about, building off of others, because other folks will comment on that. And you can go into other folks' posts and comment on theirs. But that's the crawl stage, right? And then from there, you can build on that. And you get to the walk stage where maybe you're posting other people's content, like Otis was talking about. You're sharing what they've already posted, or you're coming up with a concise summary of content you've seen, like some of the folks do here for office hours, where they post, the significant lessons learned. And then you build on that, and maybe at the run phase, you're creating your own content. You've got it all figured out. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Like I said, it's always changing. I thought I had it figured out, and I'm still figuring out. But I think the key point is start. Get over the fear and just start. So with that, just want to read real quick here. Christopher mentions Bradley Rice. I think he's with Talent Stacker, has some great branding content. I would agree with you. Definitely follow him. And we'll go ahead and turn it over to David Albright, who has a question. David, you have the floor.
Thanks, Dave. No, I just wanted to make a comment. And Hoop, I think you and I talked about this one time with back when the airlines were hiring. I think you were going to Southwest. I was working for American at the time. Hosts, you also have to consider the optics of it. And that's something I don't think we've talked on here yet. Be careful of what you're posting, because a lot of big organizations will scan, like the airlines, the major airlines will definitely scan those. They will look, they have whole teams that are looking at Instagram, your Facebook, things like that, to see what you're posting, to see what your branding is, and to see if you're considerate of that image that you put out, because they will look at that. Did they want that image from one of their employees? So I think everyone on here gets that, but it's something worth noting. Like if you have one of those fast finger days when you're just didn't have enough coffee and you're angry and you fire something off, people are watching that, and people could react to it and react negatively to it. So take that into consideration.
Yeah, great point. Don't brand angry.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think that's one of the most important things with social media is, what's the point? Why are you on LinkedIn talking about these different things? Do you have a brand? Does firing off angry messages align with your brand? If it doesn't, why are we doing that? So it's just really these social media is just a tool, and it depends on what your goal is. So hopefully it aligns with your brand and with your goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just shared a couple links in here to posts from Megan Tuano, who is a thought leader in the community. She's also on this call, which is cool. Hi, Megan. So Megan, if you have any thoughts, feel free to speak up if you can. I don't know if if you've got things going on in the background, but would love to hear your feedback on the topic, because obviously you're very successful at branding and are pretty much my mentor when it comes to building a YouTube channel from scratch. Still working on that.
Hey, everybody. Hi. So in terms of personal branding, I would say, I was, like Otis said earlier, I was super nervous about starting, but it's just about getting out there, putting your thoughts out there. People want to hear it. People need to hear it. And don't get caught up with making edits. You'll definitely find errors along the way. And that's just part of the growth process. So if you are thinking about posting that first thing, just go for it. Don't look back. People will love it.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I appreciate it, Megan. Otis, another question for you. As we talked about, the military doesn't teach service members how to brand themselves. It's the opposite. We're encouraged to limit our social media activity, obviously for operations security reasons, OPSEC. What are maybe some branding tips and some best practices that you discovered later, even recently, that you wish you'd known during your transition? Some stumbling blocks that maybe you had that you can prevent others on this call and watching the video afterwards from going through themselves?
Kind of talked about a few of them, but one of them you just did, which is take a picture. Take a picture and take video. Man, I wish I had, in the first 10 years of my career as a lieutenant, and even flying out in the operationally on these deployments. I mean, you're allowed to take pictures in certain areas. Take pictures and then post those pictures along with your story. A picture is it's worth so much more sometimes. And talk about that picture. So I would say, talk about some of your experiences, but also include a picture or video, just like you're doing now. Another thing that I learned, a little technique is maybe try to tie in certain calendar events that the world is watching. So we're in January right now. Like for me, it was around fitness or sports events. So we had the Super Bowl coming up. So I would talk about the teamwork that's required to get to the Super Bowl. Or the internal teamwork with the offensive line, the quarterback, the receivers, the communication that needs to happen with the coaches on the sideline and all the strategists up in the stands. And I would try to relate that to my job as an account exec. So, and then I would hashtag Super Bowl, teamwork, and those kinds of things would take off and trend and go viral. And it's shareable because I have a picture of the Super Bowl team. Nothing to do with the Air Force, nothing to do with really the account exec, but we're just talking about the Super Bowl, and that's trending anyways. So you can almost piggyback on calendar events that are happening, and just look at the calendar. What's a big holiday that's coming up, or maybe what's an event or conference that you're going to. Talk about that conference before you're going to go. People will reach out to you, say, "Hey, I'm going to the same conference. Let's meet up. Let's connect. Let's network." While you're there, take a picture with folks that are there. Take a group picture. Talk about how many, all these great contacts that you had. And then afterwards, maybe a lesson learned at the event or things that you would do different. So before, during, and after, and then also piggybacking on calendar events that are happening throughout the year.
That's a great point, especially the picture video. I wish that I had started recording these sessions when I first kicked them off. But definitely found that once I did start recording them and then sharing them on YouTube, it did help to elevate my brand. So great point. I read somewhere that adding a picture to your LinkedIn post increases viewership by something like 8 times. So it's science. It works. Do include a picture or a video. And I hadn't considered current events and aligning it with the current event. Really, the only time I've done that, but it makes sense, is around the new year, where you kind of share your goals. But to that point, that was one of I did it probably, I think it was a couple of years ago. I haven't done it since, but that was one of the most viewed posts that I'd ever had, was sharing my New Year's goals. Basically saying, hey, in the previous year, here was what I had set out to do, and here's what I actually accomplished. Here's what I'm targeting for next year. Because it's motivational for me, but it's also, I think, other folks like to read about that to get ideas for what goals they can set, and also see that it can be done in the span of a year. You can actually accomplish all this stuff, again, with those micro goals. So great points. Let's see, just making sure. Oh, we got a question from Greg. How has the transition been like to move into sales from your military background? The two sound very different. And then also, what do you do now to get 1% better and effective as a salesperson? Great questions, Greg. Thank you.
That is a great question. And that was probably, I'll just share with the group here and be vulnerable. That was one of the biggest weaknesses that when I did my interview was, hey, you've never really had traditional sales experience as a salesperson. So how did you overcome that? So what I did was, when I was in the military, I wasn't full-time military all the time for 21 years. So I was part-time military in the Guard or Reserves. So I had a civilian job. My job was to do keynote speeches for 3 years. So I was selling myself. I was selling my brand on stage. So I looked for opportunities and ways to tell my story about how I was able to effectively sell at a high level at the C-suite, and take my team along the journey with me. The same thing that I do as an account exec. So I looked for small nuances in my experience that allowed me to translate that into sales. Number one. Number two, and this kind of doesn't touch on that particular topic, but I learned how to change my resume to match what I was what the job that I was searching for. So I learned that the account executive was probably the right role for me, and my my resume read completely different. But it was the same stuff, the same titles. I just changed the wording to align with the job title, and that instantaneously changed everything when the recruiters were reaching out to me. What do I do to get 1% better every day? A lot of it is reading. So I'm constantly reading. I'm listening into other account executives' pitches or them talking to clients. I'm also talking a lot to my solution engineers and learning the technical piece behind it. I don't need to try to go and build a Salesforce org, but I need to know the things that are important to them so that I can tee my team up for success. So it's a lot of listening, but it's also a lot of consumption of knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg, for the questions, and thank you for the answers, Otis. I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit with another question. So you hit on one of the hardest things, aside from branding, which I thought was extremely difficult. You hit on the other thing during my transition that I struggled with, and I started 5 years before I actually needed to transition, working on my resume. And I don't even know how many iterations it went through, and I threw them away each time. And finally, like, I did find a solution that ultimately enabled me to create a resume, and I'll share that. But I'd love to hear kind of your resume journey and what resources you use to produce a resume that didn't just scream military jargon and was translatable and relatable to folks in the civilian career space.
Well, that's probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned, and it's where I got the most value out of the networking and the connections on LinkedIn. So I just reached out to, I literally in the search typed in account executive, Salesforce, and some other companies, and I looked for account executives, and I just talked to them. And surprisingly, every single one of them responded back, happy to talk to me, either that same day or the next day. And people want to share their stories. They want to share what the things that they did wrong or the things that they would have done differently. So I got a lot of resume input, but I also was able to look at a bunch of different resumes that they had already done. They had already gone the path for 2 to 3 years or 5 years. And so I looked at their resume and I looked at mine and I'm like, man, this is completely saying the wrong thing. And so what I did was I just Googled the job title that I was looking for. And there's a ton of resumes on of course, on Google. If you're not able to connect with somebody, or if you don't feel comfortable connecting. And I started to match the words in the job description with things that I knew I could do. And I started to blend those things together with the things that the value and the skill sets that I bring, matched it to the actual title of the job that I was searching for. So my goal aligned with my language. And that's how I was able to translate my skill set much better, because I had never really done that before after 20 something years. So I did that. And then the other piece was I talked to folks just like we're doing now. And I didn't know a lot of these forums existed. So I just literally just pinged guys. I'm like, hey, I see that you're an Air Force Academy grad and you're an account executive. Do you mind chatting with me for a little bit? And I've done that a bunch. I probably talked to 2 or 3 folks a week. And I shoot them my resume. I look at their resume. It looks just like mine did. And then I was like, yeah, hey, they don't probably care about all that stuff that you think is cool in your 20 years and all those OPR and EPR bullets. Nobody really cares. Focus on the value that you're going to bring to that company or to your boss on how they're going to get the mission done. So that was my kind of resume journey.
That's great. I'm going to touch on that because it definitely you hit on a lot of great points. Before I do that, though, just wanted to highlight a couple comments in chat right now. Iris mentions that Iris, who works for Hiring Our Heroes, they have help. They provide help with resumes. And then Christopher mentioned that he learned to create a master resume with all of his achievements, and then you parse that out based upon the job description to create specialized, specialized resumes for the individual jobs. I learned the same thing through 4Block. You've got this huge list of everything you've done, all the education, and then that's your list to choose from when you create these resumes that you need to tailor to that specific job description. But Otis, your points are spot on. I think and you talked about this, you have to speak the language of the
Mhm.
employer. And so a great way to do that, in a way that I use as well, is what you talked about, informational interviews. You know, I don't, if you don't already follow Michael Quinn, I've posted some of his LinkedIn posts in the comments here. That a couple of them actually talk about informational interviews and how to do them. They'll also be in the little sheet that I include as part of the YouTube session. If you missed that earlier in there, you'll be able to access it on YouTube. But those are a couple checklists on how to do that. It's a critical part of the transition process, whether you come from the military or not. You've got to meet with folks and learn how to speak the language, and that will absolutely help you with resumes, with interviews, with the whole application process. And there's lots of tools out there that you can use to leverage for informational interviews. Otis mentioned he used LinkedIn, and he just made phone calls or requested folks chat with him. That's a great tool. Vetterati is also out there, which was created specifically to facilitate informational interviews. VETERATI, spelling in public. Vetterati, totally free, and you can access mentors from across all the different industries, not just Salesforce. But that's a huge part of it is have those conversations, get over the fear of getting out there and just talk to folks. And you'll find that if you're just asking for 15 minutes of someone's time and you've taken the time prior to kind of get to know them on social media and warm up that relationship, they're more than happy to spend 15 minutes talking about what they do, right? Because they love what they do, or they wouldn't do it. And sharing that with someone else is a great thing. I do it all the time. It's fun having these conversations. So get out there and do that. The other thing that you want to leverage, and Otis mentioned this too, is, like Otis came from a pilot background. At the surface, how does that translate into sales? If you show up with a resume that speaks to pilot skills and all the different combat deployments, you're going to leave the employer wondering how you can add value to their organization. But if you focus on your soft skills and your meta skills, right, and you frame that in the context of the job you're going for, then you're speaking their language, and they can see how 3,500 flight hours translates into being a phenomenal sales leader, because you have this, you've learned crew coordination, right, where you're working with a team to advance a common goal. You've got crisis management, you've got conflict management, you've got resource management, project management. All these things are useful in the sales role. And so, translating those in a way that makes sense by focusing on those soft and meta skills is the way to go. I'm just scanning comments here real quickly.
Don't forget FUBAR management.
Yeah. Well, crisis management, FUBAR management.
Well, just to add, Dave, just a comment. I think I'm so glad to have Otis today, and I think he's hidden on all of the points for folks that are trying to network in the industry. Look, you all have heard me before. I've been at Salesforce for almost 9 years now. The resume inside of Salesforce, we have a career plan deck that never stops. The evolvement never stops. The reaching out to different folks. I work in core at Salesforce. That's like the platform, right? Service Cloud. We have multiple divisions. I reach out to people to MuleSoft. I will never be a MuleSoft architect, but I want to understand how they manage their business. And maybe at some point, there might be a role in that division that I never would have considered. So a lot of this networking, a lot of the branding, a lot of the the tips that you're hearing here are not just to get it into the field. Once you get into the field, if you want to advance and you have an idea, or you don't have an idea and you want to learn, once you get into the field, these same tips and the same skills are going to just give you a lot of that value, right? They're going to give you your North Star, what you're trying to accomplish. So it doesn't end. So you should become accustomed to that, right? To know how to ask questions, or I'm already thinking of reaching out to Otis. I'm not in sales. I'm post sales. I'm CSG, but it's great to hear from another person at Salesforce that is in a different specialty. And it would be great just to, again, it's all about building that repertoire. We did it in the military. We didn't know we were doing business work in the military, right? I was enlisted, and they always tell you don't volunteer. why is Kamei raising his hand? Because I wanted to learn. But because you raise your hand and you ask and you reach out, that's how you learn to make mistakes and then become really good at what you do. And so Otis, I thank you so much. I'm like, look, I feel like I'm back at school with today's session. So thank you for your insight.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You know, and it especially coming from an operational pilot role. One of the things that I tried to do, well, actually it was pointed out to me was, hey man, people that are making decisions are still people. They're just people. So you find ways to connect, and you have whatever industry you're in, you probably have 10, 15, 20 years in your field of expertise, but you're still a person connecting with another person. There's still probably very similar problems and challenges that you had to overcome in your field of expertise that you found creative ways to overcome. And one of the things that was pointed out to me was, you know, when you go into a conversation with a decision maker, a wing commander or a general, you're going to have automatic credibility. So you get to kind of break those barriers down, chat for 5-10 minutes about your different experiences, and now that just makes the conversation flow so much easier. So that's one of the advantages that I have over a traditional salesperson that was just in sales. I actually lived it. So I lived the world that I'm helping these guys solve problems. And it took somebody else from the outside to tell me that, and it convinced me to give me enough confidence to go after a role that actually fits me really well. So that was the value in talking to folks that didn't have the same background as me. So I would highly encourage you not just to reach out to folks that are in that industry, but maybe in the same company, but different departments, so you can get a different perspective.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I always tell folks, you know, once you decide upon your industry, connect with everyone you possibly can in that industry and in related industries, because you never know when the connection is going to lead downrange to an opportunity that is going to be really where you want to be, and you never would have discovered it had you not put yourself out there and created this you know, complex web of connections. In a case in point, I was finally able to find a position where you know, I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing outside of the military, and it took me a couple of years to get there. And it came from a LinkedIn post where I shared that I, you know, had completed a certification, and an account exec on my current team saw that, and I had been, you know, promoting my brand, and he reached out and said, "Hey, are you interested in?" This was already after I was at Salesforce, but I was working in a role that I loved, but you know, to be honest, I love the role I'm in even more. And so he said, "Are you interested in being a solution engineer? You know, the Navy and Marine Corps teams are getting built up, and we have need of SEs." And I didn't know what that was. And so some of the folks have already heard me tell the story, but the point is, you know, put yourself out there, because you never know when the dream job is going to come along, and it's going to result from some connection you made or some post you made without even intending it to, you know, to happen. And that certainly happened for me. It sounds like, Otis, it happened for you as well. You know, the universe will provide for you, but you got to put yourself out there, get over the fear, and just, you know, start connecting with people and having those informational interviews and those conversations. I want to point out a couple comments in the chat. Trish mentioned that she enjoyed David K. Liu's Steal My Resume video. If you're not following David Liu, he was on the show previously. He's a technical architect at Google, who's also a Salesforce MVP and Golden Hoodie Award winner, and puts out his own, obviously his own content on LinkedIn, but he has his own website, SF99, and his own podcast. So great content, and you know, learn a lot from him. Chloe mentioned the Honor Foundation and their, you know, 50 cups of coffee program, which sounds like, you know, it's 50 informational interviews, and so that's another resource. And then Steve brings up a great point where, you know, once you reach your, you know, you get hired, right, and you've achieved your goal. That's not when you put down your brand, right? Your brand hasn't served its purpose, and you put it away, and you're like, cool, I'm done, and you move on. You have to continually evaluate your brand and continually update your brand. And I'm doing it on a daily basis. I'm thinking, how can I evolve my brand even more? How can I change it? And based upon changes that I've made in the past 10 months to my brand, even though by my own metrics, you know, I'm doing pretty good, but I have been able to do even better just by tweaking that brand a little bit and you know, generating different types of content. So always be branding is kind of my motto, and you know, I think it should be yours as well. Couple see, we got about 9 minutes left. A couple more comments, and then I want to head back over to Otis and ask some more questions. But a resource, and I'm going to put it in chat here, that I really like. It's an app. It's totally free. Is Blinkist. And it basically is a content provider where it will send you a message a day and tell you, based upon the topics you select when you set up the app. Like mine's professional development and productivity. And so I get a little hit in my app every day that provides a book or an article that I find really interesting. And I'll go on Amazon and I'll go put that book in my wish list. You can pay for it too if you want to dive deeper into the content, but the free version really serves its purpose. Really great app. If you lose my audio, my earbuds are telling me my battery's low, so I'll switch over pretty quick. But I wanted to also answer Greg's earlier question about 1%, and what do you do? Once you've reached the role that you set out to do, how do you continue to get 1% better every day? And for me, what I do is I search out those gaps, the things that other folks either aren't doing because they don't want to, or aren't doing because they haven't thought of it in the organization, and I try to fill those gaps. So is there a product out there that doesn't exist and would be great? Is there a process you can develop or improve upon? Is the customer asking for something and no one seems to have an answer? Find those gaps, and they exist everywhere. And I think you're probably most apt to notice them right when you get to an organization, because you're fresh and you're used to doing things a certain way, and typically the new organization won't conform to the way that you do things. So you'll spot these things that you'll say to yourself, I used to do it this way at my old organization. This new organization doesn't have this process, doesn't have this product. So seize on that, make that your 1% where you're providing that. And I guarantee you, you'll find success. And I've used that throughout my career, both military and post-military, to continue to get better at what I'm doing. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and head back over here to my topic list. And so, we've talked a lot about brand, Otis. I wanted to touch back on the account exec role. And you talked about kind of what your motivations were and how you prepared for that career. But, for those that are interested maybe in following the AE career path, or even a related sales career path, BDR, SDR, how would you recommend they get started? What are some resources they can use to find out about the career paths and then start preparing?
Well, I kind of touched on it earlier. Like I said, I didn't know much about that career path, but really it's about networking and reaching out. And reach out to me. I mean, I'll be happy to talk offline with you and talk about my experience. I've been with Salesforce now for 1 year and 3 months as an AE. And on our team, there's 5 account executives. And most of those folks are traditional salespeople with no Air Force background. So they'll reach out to me and ask, hey, is this framed right? Or is this how I'm going to present this? Is this framed right? I'm like, no, you don't frame it like that to a commander or to a wing commander or to a general or a senior NCO. But at the same time, what I would do is ask them, hey, is this piece framed right, where I'm kind of closing out a sales presentation? They're like, nope, you want to focus on this or that. So my biggest recommendation would be to connect with as many account executives as you can. And if you find some kind of common thread where you may have some common interests, talk about that. Use that as an intro. For me, a lot of people want to talk about the fitness journey or me doing a triathlon or what have you, and we'll connect there. And then that kind of opens up the floodgates to kind of chat about some other things, specifically about my very different career path and all the different ways that I've kind of gone.
Yeah, those are great points. Chat with the folks that are doing those roles, obviously, because they have the most up-to-date knowledge on how to get into them. And to that point, if there's roles out there that folks want to know about, I'm more than happy to make an introduction to either the recruiting or the hiring manager for roles that are actively hiring, or folks that are actually working in the roles outside of talent management. And so, hit me up on LinkedIn. I've done it for numerous folks who, went to the career page on Salesforce and pulled down a few roles that looked interesting. And then I'll set them up with that hiring manager, that recruiter, so they can get a feel for, is this a good fit or not? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But often those conversations, those initial conversations will spawn other conversations with other folks, and will eventually lead to a path. And that's, when you're entering the ecosystem, or even if you've been established for a while and you're looking for something different, those are the kind of conversations you want to have, to advance your journey.
David, if I could kind of piggyback on what you just mentioned, one of the techniques that I did, like you just did the screenshot of all of us, and if I post that tonight and I'm not a member of Salesforce, I just post it and say, hey, I talk about, hey, I got some value out of this. Here's the 3 things that I learned out of that. But it's not just the post, it's what you do after that. So then I would go and I would search in Salesforce Account Executives in LinkedIn, and I would go just blindly request a connection with 100 of them or 50 or whatever the case may be. And guess what? The first thing that we always do when somebody asks to connect with us is we go and look at their profile. What's the last thing that they posted? Oh, they just posted something about Salesforce. We must have a common bond, a common connection. So now I get the private message that says, hey man, saw that you were on David Nava's on his podcast. Would love to chat with you. It's an easy way to kind of get a connection. So depending on your target, whatever your last post is, go and connect with people that have a connection or relation with those. And that's one of the things that was really valuable for me as I was talking to different companies.
That's a great point. The post follow-up. And so, we've talked a lot about kind of the big idea of what is branding and how do you, why does it enable you to be successful? But at the tactical level, what do you do day to day to promote your brand, to create a brand? Otis brings up a great point, right? So, at the macro level, for me anyway, my approach, and we've got a couple minutes left, so I'll just go into it really briefly, is a brand needs really 3 things, right? You got to, if you're going to use social media to advance your brand, you've got to create a profile, and your profile has to speak to your brand. Right? So if you're a Salesforce professional, update your LinkedIn profile, picture, background image, work experience, featured items, the whole thing's got to scream, I'm either a current Salesforce professional or I'm an aspiring Salesforce professional. Working on your network, building connections every single day, 15 to 20 folks every single day, to Otis's point, connecting with people, looking for opportunities to connect. And that's anyone in the ecosystem or related ecosystem, because again, you never know where your opportunity is going to arise. And then the whole point is to create content. You can't really have a brand if you don't create content. So you've got to get over that fear, and you've got to put out content on a consistent basis. So I would challenge everyone, during the next week or so, as you think about your brand and how you're going to advance it, work on your profile, fix one thing, advance your network, connect with at least 10 folks every day, and put out at least one post. Social media platform of your choice. Mine's LinkedIn, because that's where all my jobs have come from, and it sounds like it has from Otis as well. But put out one post, one well thought post, and then to Otis's point, follow up with that. Right, everyone that responds to your post, with a comment, like the comment or love it, or whatever the auto emoji you want to use, and then respond. Right, so that show that gratitude. And if you pay attention to the folks that are posting on your or commenting on your post, they're going to know that you value their comments, and they're going to keep commenting, which all goes to contributing toward your brand. And then connect with them. Like to Otis's point, connect with every single person that looks at your or has a reaction to your post, or that comments. And over time, that will help you build a more robust network, which obviously contributes to your brand. So some things to think about, as you finish out your week. Just always be branding. So, Otis, did you have any final comments before we close it up for the evening?
No, this was awesome. Thanks for inviting me, David. I really appreciate it. And all the comments, it was great. And anybody, if you want to chat offline or just hit me up on LinkedIn, and happy to connect with you anytime.
Yeah, my pleasure, Otis. It was a rare treat to have you on the show. Obviously, I love personal branding, and I loved hearing your personal story, because it's a non-traditional path, right? And it's really interesting, and you've been able to achieve a phenomenal level of success. So it's always cool to be able to compare different branding strategies, and to be reminded that there isn't one answer, right? There's many answers out there. So thanks so much for volunteering your time to co-host the session with me. Had a lot of fun. And thank you to all of you for spending time with your Wednesday evening. If you want to join us next week, Nick Charles will be here, and we're going to continue the branding discussion as well as talk about his role. So have a great rest of your Wednesday evening, and have a great week, everyone. Thanks so much.